Welcome, I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres strongly condemned the terrorist bombing that targeted a mosque in Homs, stressing the need to identify those responsible for attacks on civilians and places of worship and bring them to justice. Thai Defense Ministry spokesman said Thailand and Cambodia had agreed to a second ceasefire this year to halt weeks of deadly border clashes that have killed at least 101 people, with the truce taking effect at 5 o'clock GMT and holding hours later, as both militaries now have agreed to maintain direct communications. A Russian drone and missile barrage on Kyiv has killed one person, wounding dozens and left hundreds of thousands without power and heating in freezing temperatures. The hours-long air alert comes ahead of President Volodymyr Zelensky's planned meeting with President Donald Trump to discuss a possible peace plan. Saudi-led forces warned that they are ready to act directly against Yemen's separatists, while Riyadh urges them to peacefully hand back seized territory. Saudi officials say the priority is protecting civilians after strikes in Hadramaut and escalating tensions with UAE-backed forces. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio urges restraint in diplomacy as violence in Yemen escalates. He said that Washington supports efforts towards a lasting solution while avoiding taking sides between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Israel becomes the first country to formally recognize Somaliland as an independent state. With Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promising cooperation in key sectors, Somalia opposes secession, while President Donald Trump says he does not support U.S. recognition of Somaliland. French police arrest a man suspected of stabbing 3 women in the Paris metro during year-end festivities. Prosecutors say he's tracked through surveillance footage and his mobile phone before being detained in the north of Paris. According to Syrian state media, the funeral victims who were killed in the recent terrorist bombing at a mosque in Homs took place with hundreds of residents and officials in attendance. The ceremony highlighted public unity as authorities vowed to maintain stability and protect the civilians in the city. Now for this hour, we start with Ukraine and Trump. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he will be speaking to EU allies via video conference at a stopover in Canada before meeting President Donald Trump. This comes as Zelensky is traveling to meet with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, while in Canada he plans to hold online discussions with EU leaders to synchronize their positions on this peace plan. Zelensky has made the comments ahead of his scheduled talks in the United States with President Donald Trump on the 20-point peace plan to halt the Russia-Ukraine war. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Gilbert Doctorow. He's a Russian affairs expert, joins us live from Brussels. Thank you very much, Mr. Gilbert Doctorow, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at the upcoming talks between Ukraine and EU allies, should Ukraine prioritize unity with EU allies or flexibility in talks with the United States?
In the last few hours, we learned that Mr. Trump has poured cold water on the optimistic statements for the last couple of days by Vladimir Zelensky, to the effect that the sides are very close, a truce is near, and his expectations of agreements in Washington when he visits. The statements coming out of Team Trump are quite the opposite, that nothing immediately can be expected by progress, and that after Mr. Zelensky leaves, Trump will again reach out to President Putin to see what possible further progress can be made. But this whole method of dealing with one side and hearing their optimal solutions, and then dealing with the other side and hearing their very different optimal solutions, is only stalling for time. It's not a way to conclude a war.
Right. So how do you think, how aligned are all of them right now? European allies with Ukraine, and then Ukraine with US.
Well, I'm sorry, your voice was broken. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, let me repeat it. So how do you think, how aligned are all these parties, Ukraine's allies with Ukraine and US?
Well, I'm sorry, again, I missed half of your question, but in general, as I say, the prognosis for reaching a peace settlement by the present methods is very low. I hope that Mr. Zelensky has a nice trip to Miami. Certainly the weather is better there than it is back home in Kiev. But other than his having a bit of relaxation, I don't see much point in the travel.
And how important is, allied coordination before entering this peace talks for Ukraine?
The EU and Mr. Zelensky are very closely aligned. There isn't much to coordinate. The point is they are negotiating among themselves, which is not a way to reach a conclusion, either at the level of a truce or at the level of a final peace settlement. So it is a lot of self-congratulation and smiles going around, but it doesn't bring us any closer.
Right, and lastly, what challenges arise when multiple international actors, like in this case, all the allies talking again and again with President Zelensky, all of them attempt to shape a single peace plan?
The only logic would be for the parties to sit around the table. The Europeans are not essential to this. The Americans are not really essential to this. It is the Russians and the Ukrainians who have to deal with one another and try and reach an agreement on what can be salvaged from their objectives, which are generally contradictory. The last word from Mr. Zelensky was that we're very close. We just have a few things to bring together with respect to territorial concessions and so forth. But that's what the whole negotiation is about. Recognizing the loss of territory by Ukraine, the recognition of Russian rule in these territories that have been conquered, and getting on with it and making a peace. But that, so long as that does not happen around a single table, all of these discussions are just buying time for all the parties for their own particular reasons, but they do not bring us to a peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doctor, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for another discussion as well. Now we have a breaking news. At least 15 people were killed and 19 others injured after a passenger bus plunged into a ravine on the Inter-American Highway in western Guatemala, according to emergency officials. Firefighters said the victims include 11 men, 3 women, and a minor. The injured were rushed to the nearby hospitals for treatment. The crash has happened in Guatemala's Solola department between kilometers 172 and 174, a stretch of road notorious for dense fog and poor visibility. Images related by local fire services showed the mangled bus at the bottom of the ravine as rescue teams worked through the early hours to recover victims and assist survivors. Authorities are investigating the cause of the crash, with weather and road conditions expected to be key factors. Now we move back to Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine's anti-corruption agency has said that it is being blocked by state security forces from carrying out raids inside of the parliament, as investigators probe a new organized crime case allegedly involving sitting lawmakers. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau, known as NABU, says undercover operations uncovered an organized criminal group that includes current members of parliament. Investigators claim officers from Ukraine's State Security Department who are actively resisting searches inside of the parliamentary committees. Local media reports arrests are underway in Kyiv's government district, but NABU officers have not yet been allowed to enter the Verkhovna Rada building. The standoff comes as Ukraine faces a widening corruption crisis at the top of government. Several senior officials linked to President Volodymyr Zelensky have resigned in recent weeks. Among them is former Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak, who stepped down last month after being implicated in the ongoing investigation. The developments risk deepening political tensions as Kyiv seeks to project transparency while relying heavily on Western support. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Gilbert Doktorov. He's a Russian affairs expert, joins us live from Brussels. Thank you very much, Mr. Doktorov, for staying with us. Now looking at this, a lot of corruption-related charges or corruption-related news coming from Ukraine. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, in addition to what you have reported, which is new and important, the Russians, and I have in mind TASS, their news agency, gives a little bit of supplemental information. What they point out is that today in the Ukrainian parliament, which is called the Rada, there were only 30 deputies present. And there were only 30 deputies because the rest didn't dare show up, since they were aware of that this anti-corruption organization was descending on the parliament, probably to make arrests. And they further point out that there were two deputies in particular who were believed to be the object of the visit by NABU. NABU is the Ukrainian acronym for the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And these both are very close, people very close to Mr. Zelensky. What it is fair to say is that they are circling Zelensky, and they will, as we say in English, nail Zelensky at some point in the next few weeks, because the evidence mounts that the people around him were all corrupt. The logic is that he also was corrupt. So I think that his tenure in office is jeopardized by the continuing activities of NABU and today's fright put into the deputies who didn't show up at the parliamentary building for fear of being arrested. I think that is indicative of the scope of the corruption investigation and of its political direction.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. And you know, how does this corruption allegations around Zelensky and in highest levels of Ukraine's government, how is this affecting international support and credibility? Also, is there anyone who can replace Zelensky as a leader if Zelensky is also maybe affected by these?
As folklore tells us, there are no irreplaceable people. So of course Mr. Zelensky can be replaced, and of course there are candidates to fill that post, and they're not from among the former presidents of Ukraine, who are themselves deeply corrupt and deeply disliked by the population. There will be some new faces that we don't yet identify directly. But the international dimension you have correctly raised should be viewed for the opposite end. It is not how this corruption scandals will affect the situation in Ukraine. It is how the international situation is affecting or may affect the stability in Ukraine. What I have in mind is the Anti-Corruption Bureau is heavily supported by the United States of America. Their activity, which will eventually, almost certainly, bring down Zelensky, is encouraged by the Trump administration.
Right. And how should Ukraine Ukraine's government now balance parliamentary immunity with the need for aggressive anti-corruption enforcement, while also fighting a war.
The war's continuation is due to the nexus of people around Mr. Zelensky, who are the same ultranationalists who came to power in February 2014 during a coup d'etat. It is only with the removal of those people, not just Mr. Zelensky himself, but of his close colleagues, who are now under attack precisely by NABU, by the anti-corruption organization. With their removal, one by one, or as a whole group, their way will be cleared for new people to come to power who are ready to make peace with Russia on realistic terms.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Dr. O for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Middle East. Somalia's Al-Qaeda-linked militant group Al-Shabaab has vowed to fight any attempt by Israel to claim or use parts of Somaliland following its recognition of the breakaway territory. Further warning Israel, it said Israel's recognition of Somaliland as a sovereign state shows it has decided to expand into parts of the Somali territories to support the apostate administration in the northwest regions. Israel has become the first country to formally recognize Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland as an independent nation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel intended to immediately expand cooperation in agriculture, health and technology, while Somaliland's President Abdurrahman Mohamed Abdullahi called the development a historic moment. The decision has been condemned by the foreign ministers of Somalia, Egypt, Turkey and Djibouti, who in a statement have affirmed their total rejection of Israel's announcement. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Mati Zweig. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Zweig, for joining us. Good to see you. Mr. Zweig, this is very surprising to me. Why did Israel decide to announce this, and why recognize Somaliland as a country, being the very first country in the world to recognize Somaliland as a country?
Well, it's an interesting question because, Somaliland has existed also and declared independence during a secession from the Somalia, big country, in 1960. And then 35 countries in the world recognized them, but they fall down after 5 days, so nobody recognized them anymore. But many countries continue to have a relationship with them through the years, more or less, like in some ways, United States, Israel, Taiwan even, and Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, for instance, they did not a long time ago an agreement with Somaliland because of all their own war with Eritrea, left them without ports to exit to the markets. So they did agreement with Somaliland to use the port of Berbera. And in this case, so everything was quiet and smoothly, but there was not an official reconnaissance. Now, the timing of this Israel decision is critical because all the area is having what this is called the end of Arab time. I mean, with collective security in a weakest point under a paradigm of competing regional projects, as the same way that Yemen, Libya, Sudan, and now Somalia are losing geopolitical weight. And this is something that Israel want to take advantage for, is because after the 7th of October, they have to realign all their relationships in the area to try to cope with Iran, for instance. And what happened with the United States, they always also want to cope with this situation when in the neighboring Djibouti, they have the only Chinese completely private port. And this is part of the, US-China race in the world. About Israel itself, They did it as a political gesture from things that are anyway occurring under the table, that is formal relations. And also Israel wants to put an eye on the Bab el-Mandeb area, which is used by the Somalis and the Houthis to make a lot of problems to Israel and the West, attacking vessels and so on. So from all these reasons, they have recognized them, taking in account that a lot of countries in the world, anyway, they are attacking Israel for their position in Gaza and so on. So that's what's happening now. And they didn't care about recognizing them, despite that the world formally don't recognize this country, not because they don't know about it. It's just because in the Union of African Countries, they have a chapter that they say that it's not politically acceptable to recognize secessions, because, you know, Africa is formed by many, many countries with many tribes and areas that they can split, and they don't want to have a precedent like this. But anyway, things are changing all the time, and that's what happened.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And Mr. Zweig, now, you know, bringing, this is just alleged, but was there any discussion or a discussion about sending the Palestinians or displaced people of Gaza to Somaliland?
Yes, it was some of it when Trump said that he wanted to make people move from Gaza, that is 80% destroyed, to other countries. And one of the places that they were having in their mind is to pass people to Somaliland. But this is no longer a discussion now, since there is a peace prospect for Gaza and from now and in the future. And Somaliland can maybe accept people, but they know that it's going to be also even locally opposed. And then about the Shabaab, when you started and to say the Shabaab is not very, happy with what this is happening. I mean, Al-Shabaab is a terrorist organization, an Islamist organization, that they are trying to take over the Somalia country, and they're also trying to influence the neighboring countries. So destabilizing is not because Israel is recognizing them, it's because the Shabaab is behaving in this terrorist way.
Right. And lastly, Mr. Zweig, should international recognition of Somaliland be based on its democratic, or successful democratic governance, or on respecting Somalia's territorial integrity? Could recognizing Somaliland by Israel set a precedent for other, secessionist movements?
Well, yeah, maybe it's going to be a precedent for others, and maybe it's only a political gesture with no further conclusions of other people, other countries that they have to recognize too. But for Israel, of course, it's better to have friends in that area, that they are destabilizing the whole Middle East with the pirates and the Islamist movement. So they don't really care about this. But of course, also internally in Israel, people is not very pleased with this move, because it's like saying, okay, all the world don't recognize Northern Cyprus, only Turkey, so now we are doing the same. So it's controversial, but it's not going to change the world. The reality is what is going to change the world.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Matti Zweig for joining us, as always, and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. A 72-hour ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia have begun today. On December 27th, following nearly 3 weeks of intense fighting along their border. The ceasefire will be monitored for 72 hours, with the release of 18 Cambodian soldiers held by Thailand since July as part of this agreement. At least 101 people have been killed and nearly 1 million have been displaced due to this conflict. The talks are supposed to be by both supported by both China and the US, and aims to stabilize the situation and clear the landmines in the area. Meanwhile, the agreement also stipulates the border demarcation talks involving the both countries. However, tensions remain high, and achieving long-term stability will be challenging given the history of the border dispute. Let's listen into what the Defense Minister of Cambodia has shared.
បទជប់បាញ់នេះហើយយើងមានការអត់ធ្មត់រហូតដល់72ម៉ោងដើម្បីធានាបាននៅកាធានាបាននៅបទជប់បាញ់នេះហើយ18រូបនេះបានត្រឡប់មកប្រទេសកម្ពុជាវិញជួបនឹងបងប្អូនក្រុមគ្រួសាររបស់គាត់វិញនៅថ្ងៃខាងមុខនេះអ្វីដែលតាមរយៈនៃបទជប់បាញ់នៅថ្ងៃនេះគឺនឹងបើកផ្លូវឲ្យបងប្អូនប្រជាពលរដ្ឋភាគសឹកដែលមានលំនៅឋានតាមតំបន់ព្រំដែននេះអាចមានលទ្ធភាពក្នុងការត្រឡប់ទៅរស់នៅលំនៅឋានរបស់ខ្លួនវិញអាចប្រកបមុខរបរក៏ដូចជាធ្វើស្រែចម្ការនិងបងប្អូនដែលមានកូនកុមារដែលអាចត្រឡប់ទៅចូលរៀននៅតាមបណ្ដាសាលារៀនបាននៅតាមបន្ទាត់ព្រំដែននេះចំណុចដ៏សំខាន់មួយទៀតគឺកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងនេះគឺមិនប៉ះពាល់ដល់ការខណ្ឌសីមាព្រំដែនរវាងប្រទេសទាំងពីរនោះទេភាគីទាំងពីរគឺបានឯកភាពគ្នាគឺជូនដល់គណៈកម្មការចម្រុះខណ្ឌសីមាព្រំដែនគោកគឺហៅកាត់ថា JBC បន្តធ្វើដំណើរការឡើងវិញហើយបានឆាប់រហ័សបំផុតក្នុងការងារវាស់វែងនឹងខណ្ឌសីមាព្រំដែនស្របតាមកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងដែលមានស្រាប់រវាងប្រទេសទាំងពីរដើម្បីសម្រេចបាននូវសន្តិភាពយូរអង្វែងនៅតាមបន្ទាត់ព្រំដែនយើង
Now we move on to the Middle East. Turkey has held an official funeral ceremony in Ankara for members of high-level Libyan military delegation who were killed in a plane crash last week. Actually, this week, the service took place at the Murted Air Base Command, where 8 victims were honored, including Libya's Chief of General Staff, General Muhammad Ali al-Haddad, before their bodies were repatriated to Libya. Senior Turkish officials, including National Defense Minister Yaşar Güler and Chief of General Staff General Seljuk Bayraktaroğlu, has attended the ceremony along with the Libyan ambassador, delegation members, and victims' families. The crash occurred on December 23rd when a private jet carrying the Libyan delegation went down in Ankara. In Turkey, killing all 8 on board, the ceremony included prayers and Quranic recitations, followed by the transfer of the remains to an aircraft bound for Libya. Following the service, Turkey's Chief of General Staff traveled to Libya to attend further military ceremonies, highlighting the close defense cooperation and strategic ties between Ankara and Tripoli. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.